it looks more and more that we are on the verge of a sort of big paradigm shift, both geopolitically and perhaps also economically speaking. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think we're in a paradigm shift. That's correct. So it's if you look at the global system, it was actually built on two ideas. One was to generate interdependencies. So we are dependent on the others are dependent on us, and that actually makes war less likely. And the other idea was what in German is called a Wandel durch Handel. So by trading, you interact with people and makes it less likely. Then you change people's attitudes, and actually you change the people as well, and you change the governance structure as well in the long run. So openness, trade, and creating mutual interdependencies was actually the key. And you can see also global value chains this way. If you have we really depend that the other country is delivering all the goods. If they don't deliver, we will be in trouble. If we don't deliver to them, they will be in trouble. So nobody wants to have a shock. Okay, there could be an outside shock like COVID, which hits all of us, and then we're in trouble. And that's why we talked a lot about resilience. But now if you move to a much more resilient society or resilient societies, it could also mean we move much more into autarky relationships. And so we get rid of these interdependencies. Hence, the force which prevents us from attacking each other is actually also reduced. Because by attacking each other, it doesn't need to necessarily be a war, but attacking each other economically or saying, okay, I cut you off because of this. If it's less costly for me, imposing sanctions on others is probably also more likely. So the whole globalization movement might go backwards. And that might hit the emerging economies in particularly hard because they rely on having open global markets. And there are essentially two ways to go. One is to say, okay, everybody's so-called this reshoring, we're going back to autarky, and that's one way to create more resilience, that you bring all the production capacities back, or you can also go more the multi-sourcing approach, where we're still interdependent, but less interdependent on a single country necessarily. So as a company, I source from 3 different continents. So if there's a shock in one continent, I still have 2 other continents, and I can be bailed. Of course, there's less interdependencies already. So if a government says we shut out one country, I can just switch to the other 2 continents suppliers, and everything will be fine. So you can see that the use of sanctions will be much less costly, and hence might be much more frequent from both sides. And that might undermine the whole, globalization movement. So, and it probably went into a watershed moment also with the war now in Ukraine, that people want more resilience, and they probably want to also more autarky, and that also makes it more likely to have more of these events coming as well, the sanctions frequency going up on both sides, on several sides, and that might divide the world much more significantly. So resilience, as an earlier audience member said, is there too much resilience? So if you have a lot of resilience, you also feel free to impose sanctions much more frequently. And this can be on both sides. So if both sides do it, that's also counterproductive.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting because it does actually relate to what Russia was doing. So as you mentioned, countries seem now to be moving more towards resilience, which, hey, great, they might have read your book, right? So economically speaking, it makes sense to be less reliant on Western finance, if I'm talking from Russia's perspective, for example. But as you mentioned, Russia has been doing this since 2014 very deliberately. They've also tried to move their reserves from dollars to euros. But that might have actually emboldened them to take this geopolitical step and invade Ukraine, which might then have reduced resilience from the war or geopolitical perspective. So increased economic resilience leads to less geopolitical resilience.
So what we want, essentially, we want to have a global economy where the whole globe is more resilient to outside shocks like COVID. But each country might not necessarily be extremely resilient because that creates the possibility of starting wars or imposing sanctions much more easily. So global resilience I would say, is always good, but country-specific resilience might lead to behavior which might undermine overall resilience from a global perspective.